Donald Trump's initiative includes a phased troop withdrawal from Gaza as Israelis gathered at Hostage Square in anticipation of the deal's implementation. The United States will deploy 200 troops to support and monitor the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, according to media reports. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said Turkey will join a task force to oversee the agreement signed in Egypt, while Israel has confirmed that prominent Palestinian prisoner Marwan Barghouti will not be part of the prisoner release deal. Russia has launched missile and drone attack on Kyiv today, plunging the Ukrainian capital into darkness, damaging critical infrastructure and wounding at least 9 people, according to Ukrainian officials. Airstrikes have also killed a 7-year-old child in Zaporizhia and forced evacuations in the Donbas region. U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has warned that air traffic controllers who repeatedly fail to report to work during the government shutdown could be fired. More than 3,300 flights were delayed on Thursday as the disruptions continued, prompting senators to urge airlines to issue refunds as government shutdown enters its 9th day. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has praised friendly and cooperative ties with China as he hosted Chinese Premier Li Qiang and other foreign dignitaries for the 80th anniversary of the Workers' Party. The celebrations, attended by Russia's Dmitry Medvedev, come as Pyongyang prepares a massive military parade. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te has unveiled a new T-Dome air defense system during National Day celebrations in Taipei. Aimed at providing multi-layered protection against Chinese military threats, Lai has announced plans for a special defense budget this year to boost Taiwan's military capabilities amid rising cross-strait tensions. Peru's Congress has approved impeachment proceedings against President Dina Boluarte after lawmakers filed 4 motions seeking her removal. The move comes amid growing public discontent and political turmoil in the country. Sweden has announced a $367 million investment to boost its anti-drone defenses, including systems to down drones and deploy hunter drones amid rising aerial threats. The funding will also enhance JAS-39 Gripen fighter jets as Europe faces growing concerns over hybrid attacks. Now we move on to our first news. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described a momentous development after his government approved the framework of a hostage release deal with Hamas, bringing both sides closer to ending over 2 years of hostilities in Gaza. The decision was made during a government meeting in Jerusalem, where U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner also provided remarks. President Netanyahu has called the agreement a diplomatic success and national and moral victory for Israel, highlighting that the release of hostages could lead to the end of the conflict. Let's listen into the comments made by both Netanyahu and U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff.
We're at a momentous development in the last 2 years. We fought during these 2 years to achieve our war aims, and a central one of these war aims was to return the hostages, all of the hostages, the living and the dead. And we're about to achieve that goal. We couldn't have achieved it without the extraordinary help of President Trump and his team, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. They worked tirelessly.
The hard job was the Prime Minister's. He had the job of protecting this country. He had the job of making tough choices with regard to how tough to be with Hamas, when to be flexible, when not to be flexible. I think to myself all the time, I lost sleep over it. What would I have done in some of those circumstances? The president believes that. My president believes it. He believes that Prime Minister Netanyahu made some very, very difficult calls. And here we are today because Hamas had to, they had to do this deal. pressure was on them, they were backed up, and you've got the bigger army, you were making inroads, and that's what led to this deal.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, given Netanyahu's description of the agreement as a diplomatic success, what challenges still remain?
Huge challenges for all involved. Currently, we can only look upon this as being a triumph for diplomacy from all parties concerned. Of that, there is no doubt. But the challenges are huge. Will the agreement stick? Will the hostage release as envisaged take place? Will both sides keep to the rules of the game? Will there be pressure from the extremists on both sides to try and create havoc in this agreement? At the moment, it would seem from the pictures we've seen in both Gaza and Israel and the comments that we've had from active players interested in achieving peace worldwide, it looks as if this diplomatic effort, a remarkable piece of diplomacy, will go forward, but the challenges are immense. The one thing that I would say, it's been quite remarkable how Iran has been totally isolated from this initiative. Although President Trump did make a comment, a hands-open comment to Iran to say that he hoped for negotiations in the future, it's quite remarkable how Iran, who were the main supporter and funder of Hamas, their child proxy, has been completely isolated from this peace initiative.
Yes, from what you know, have you heard any Iranian ministers or presidents' comments on this, or are they willing to lend hand or help the Gaza moving forward? Yeah.
Very good question. Nothing officially as yet, but I have heard through my sources that the meeting between that President Macron had with various foreign ministers yesterday, including the Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, behind the scenes are reaching out to Iran, although there has been no, to my knowledge, no official comment from the state media Iranian news agency as yet. I would think that Iran are finding it very difficult because of the sanctions imposed by France, United Kingdom and Germany. So Iran are in a very difficult position, an isolated position, but I have heard behind the scenes France via Saudi Arabia are reaching out to them. And don't forget one other thing, Saudi Arabia are absolutely delighted that Iran has been isolated and has been weakened. The Saudis have no love, Sunni Saudi Arabia has no love for non-Arab Shia Iran. So we'll see if anything is forthcoming from those behind the scenes negotiations.
Right. And now going back to other international players who did have a role in this, like Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, what role do you think that they played in securing this peace deal?
Right. If we listen to the comments made by President Trump, he has specifically named those countries that you've mentioned, as well as Indonesia, which is interesting, the largest Muslim country. He has completely ignored the efforts of the European nations and the European Union, which is interesting and is why I think President Macron convened this hastily arranged meeting of foreign ministers yesterday just to keep France's hand in the game. But President Trump completely ignored any European nation and gave absolute credit to Turkey, Qatar Egypt and Indonesia, as well as his own diplomats, of course. So I think that in itself was very interesting, and I think Trump is very annoyed with those European nations for recognising a state of Palestine without preconditions on Hamas and just at the wrong time during his negotiation process. It's typical of Trump to ignore them, and I think he has a right to do so. And frankly, Keir Starmer's is travelling in India at the moment,
Yes.
and it's clear that he and the UK government are not major influences on this decision process, although Starmer did come out and say that the United Kingdom played a behind-the-scenes role. Frankly, in the British media, that's being mocked.
Right, and you mentioned that yes, today France is hosting this convention with other Arab leaders for this deal. Although now that the deal has already or kind of entered the first phase, what are they discussing? What is there to discuss for them?
Exactly so. So from a political and a public relations point of view, it's absolutely incumbent on France and Macron to keep him in the public eye as a significant and influential world leader in terms of this Middle East process is concerned. He is clutching at straws. There is absolutely no way that he is relevant to this current discussion going on. And don't forget, another reason why he decided to hastily convene this meeting was because of the pressures he's facing domestically. Yet another Prime Minister, the shortest Prime Minister in France's history, has resigned. He has to form a government. He's clinging on to power by his fingernails. So for him, he thought this would be a way of deflecting from domestic affairs and keeping France as a significant player in world affairs, which from the statements we've had from Donald Trump, she is clearly not.
And last but not least, some of our guests have mentioned they endorsed Trump to get Nobel Peace Prize, and then some of our guests have mentioned other countries like Qatar's or other mediators to be endorsed. What's your take? Who do you think should be endorsed?
For any morally decent person with common sense, Trump should surely be nominated for this Peace Prize. However, it would not surprise most of us who follow academia and the giving out such prizes. There is a kind of Trump derangement syndrome, and Sweden and the Swedish government, or certain members of the Swedish government, and certain committees such as the Nobel Committee have Trump derangement syndrome. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least that he is not nominated, and the excuse will be that he was not nominated in time. Let's see what happens, but if anyone deserves it, in the last 50 years, since World War II, it is certainly Donald Trump for what he's achieved, not only in the Middle East, but for the other conflicts that he has brought to an end, and the one, unfortunately, the Ukrainian-Russian conflict that he has been trying to bring to an end, but because of the Putin character, he has been able to do so. But he's certainly worthy of being nominated and receiving it, yes.
Thank you very much, Peter Baum, for joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you. Now we move on. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has reported widespread power outages across 9 regions of the country, following a massive Russian attack targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. According to President Zelensky, Russia has launched an unprecedented assault involving over 450 drones and more than 30 missiles. In response, Zelensky has called on international allies, including the United States, Europe, and the G7 to move beyond symbolic gestures and take decisive action. He specifically urged the delivery of advanced air defense systems and stricter enforcement of sanctions against Russia to help Ukraine withstand these ongoing attacks. Now for this discussion, we're joined by former Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. He's a former Indian ambassador, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, how do you see the international response to Ukraine's call for advanced air defense? Also, the recent India might soon change, or they might soon stop or lower their crude oil imports from Russia?
There are two parts to your question. Firstly, I would like to go through the context of the current escalation that you have reported. And President Zelensky has been enoughly alarmed to call for wider and deeper sanctions and supplies deficit being met. I think there are two or three issues here. Firstly, the winter season is just setting in that part of the world, and energy supplies, heating, etc., becomes extremely important for the winter. Secondly, much of the attention of the Western world is diverted to what's happening in Gaza, and President Trump himself is to travel to that area, Middle East, today or tomorrow, to take the credit for having brought this ceasefire around and hostages being released. So I think President Putin's advisors would have taken this opportunity to create a distraction. Thirdly, I think what is not being said too often, Ukrainian drones have been inflicting major damages to Russia's hydrocarbon industry. The pipelines, the crude pumping stations, refineries, and ports, jetties have been attacked in a repeated manner, leading to Russia's supply bottlenecks, and exports have been also affected. So in retaliation, Russia would be attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure. All that being said, now we come to the second part of your question about India's reported curbing of imports of crude from Russia. I think these reports are often vacillatory and contradictory. Some of them indicate that India has reduced its intake. Some other talk about, while public sector might have done so, the private sector refineries are gung-ho about Russian crude. Other reports, in fact, talk about the imports of Russian seaborne crude being actually holding up as the discounts have increased. And as you might know, Indian government has claimed repeatedly that it does not interfere on political grounds in the imports. These are done on the basis of economic merits. So if the discounts are higher, then perhaps the imports would also be higher.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador Sachdev, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you. And now we stay on this topic. Sweden will invest 3.5 billion Swedish crowns, or about $367 million, in anti-drone systems to address a growing threat from aerial violations, Defense Minister Paul Johnson has said. The country plans to buy systems to shoot down drones, deploy hunter drones at air bases, and install jamming sensors. Sweden will also spend an additional 1.5 billion crowns to upgrade its JAS-39 Gripen fighter aircraft, improving spare parts and mission equipment to boost the Air Force's capability to operate from air and temporary road bases. These measures will strengthen the equipment's availability and endurance in peace, crisis, and war. Now we go back to our guest, Ambassador Sachdev, for this discussion. Ambassador, thank you for staying with us. Now, looking at this news that Sweden is going to significantly increase its investment in their anti-drone systems as well as their defense systems, what does this reveal about the changing Europe's evolving nature from less armed to more highly armed, and NATO's priorities now?
I think it's an important question. 2 or 3 things need to be borne out. Under duress from President Trump, the European members of NATO have been forced to raise their defense expenditure to 5% of GDP in a time-bound manner. And this might be one of the reasons why Sweden is spending more money on anti-drone jamming devices and shooting down devices as well. Secondly, Sweden, as you know, has only recently joined NATO. Till recently, it was a neutral country together with Finland, and both countries saw Ukraine's neutrality being not honored, so they have joined NATO as a last resort. Now, Swedish threat perceptions did exist about Russia, but after having joined NATO, they are in the direct border with Russia in the north, particularly in the North Sea, etc. There have also been repeated reports in the last 2 months of drone activity in Sweden, in Denmark, in Netherlands, Poland, Romania, Lithuania, etc. And these are, while the Russians have been accused of fomenting it, Russia has denied any involvement. I should also add that the countermeasures taken by NATO have proved ridiculously more expensive. These drones cost few $1,000s each, while sending F-16s or other fighter aircraft to bring them down, a sortie costs far, far more. So a more cost-effective anti-drone systems are needed, and this is what being attempted.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador Sachdev, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on. U.S. President Donald Trump has welcomed Finland's President Alexander Stubb to the White House, where the 2 leaders approved a deal for the U.S. Coast Guard to acquire up to 11 icebreaker ships. Under the agreement, Finland will build 4 Arctic security cutters at its shipyards, with the U.S. expected to construct up to 7 more, using Finnish expertise in American shipyards. The total cost of the new icebreakers is estimated to $6.1 billion. Let's listen into what President Trump and Stubb has said.
We have a big order coming up. We're buying icebreakers. We're building them together for the most part. We're doing 4 over there and 7 over here. And we negotiated a pretty tough price, I think. But I assume you're going to do very well. But what you're doing is you're going to be teaching us about the icebreaker business very, very strong. We only have 1 icebreaker in all of that millions and millions of acres. We only have 1 icebreaker.
Just after you had been elected in November, the first thing you mentioned was icebreakers. We need them, and then we've been working on this issue ever since. And we're happy to announce that will basically building 11 icebreakers together, 4 of them in Finland, in joint endeavors, and then 7 of them here. And I think the reason that we've landed in Finland is that 60% of the world's icebreakers are built in Finland. 80% are designed. We've been building them for over 100 years.
Now we move on. Now we stay on this topic. The deal seeks to strengthen U.S. national security in the Arctic and counter the growing influence of China and Russia. President Trump and Stubb have maintained friendly ties since President Trump's return to office in January, having met earlier this year in Florida, including a round of golf. The leaders also discussed Russia's invasion of Ukraine and continuing security cooperation between the U.S. and Europe, with Stubb downplaying an imminent military threat from Moscow to Finland. Now we move on to Asia. Japan's Komeito Party will leave the ruling coalition led by the Liberal Democratic Party, marking a historic shift for the alliance that has ruled Japan for most of the past 2 decades. Komeito's exit could jeopardize the path for newly elected LDP chief Sanai Takaichi to become Japan's next prime minister, as her appointment required support from the coalition partner. Komeito leader Tetsuo Saito has informed Takaichi of the decision during a meeting on Friday. It is unclear whether Komeito will continue to support the LDP in parliament, which may hurt Takaichi's chances in an upcoming vote. The LDP holds 296 of 713 seats in parliament, while Komeito holds 45 seats. Takaichi's selection last week has affected markets, with stocks rising and the yen weakening due to expectations around fiscal stimulus and Abenomics policies. Komeito's departure could lead to an unwinding of the so-called Takaichi trade. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dr. Asta Shada. She's a Ritsumeikan University professor, joins us live from Kyoto. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. What more can you tell us about this news, and what do you think led to Komeito's departure?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, this news has been something which, at least for the past 2-3 days, we've been hearing on and off in Japan. As I sit here in Kyoto, and there were several disagreements that Komeito has had with the LDP party, and those disagreements date before the previous Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba had to step down, and one of the, I would say there are 2 major reasons one could highlight for this split that has happened after 26 years of this coalition surviving somehow in Japan. So one reason is the fact that there have been several instances of political funding scandals within the LDP and in the Japanese government, and hence one of the reforms that Komeito was seeking was for the political funding, and what they ultimately wanted was to limit the beneficiaries of the corporates who were funding the political parties in Japan. And what the draft that Komeito had come up in March with the Democratic Party for the People, or the DPP in Japan, basically made 2 major restrictions. One was to restrict the corporate donations, and the corporates would only be able to donate money to headquarters and prefectural chapters in Japan, and not to any individual lawmakers. That was number 1. And 2, they were trying to put a cap on the overall donations that could be made to any single party, which was at 20 million Japanese yen. And the idea was to stop, or in some way, limit the influence of large corporate donors on individual policymakers, as well as on the wider policy making. And there is hence a split, because LDP could not provide what Komeito was seeking in terms of its acceptance of this newly drafted reform for political funding. The second issue that came to light was that there were some ideological deficits, I would say, within this partnership that has survived for over 25 years. And there were concerns over public trust. So in the past elections, both Komeito and LDP have lost significantly. And even jointly, they don't hold any majority. And hence today, when Komeito backs out, we must remember that Komeito is also backed by Soka Gakkai, which is very concerned about Sanai Takaichi, who has been elected as the head or the president of the LDP for her hardline and conservative stance. So, given that Komeito's split from LDP is not so much of I would say, of a surprise, because this had been doing rounds in the news for the past 2-3 days, as I mentioned. What is more concerning is whether they will continue to support Sanai Takaichi in her bid to become Japan's next prime minister.
And Dr. Chatta, how might Komeito's departure from this ruling coalition impact the future of, you've already kind of touched down on it, but LDP's leadership?
Yeah, correct. I mean, this is going to be a big blow, as I mentioned, to LDP, because, I have spoken earlier on your channel about this, that Sanai Takaichi's candidature and her selection as LDP's president does not really guarantee her support or her position as the future prime minister of Japan. And so now LDP is in a really hard position, because with Komeito's exit, and this is given that Komeito earlier had stated that if they really do exit this partnership with LDP, they will no longer support any of the LDP candidates for prime minister. Now, given they haven't said anything today about it, but if that is going to be their stance, this makes it very difficult for LDP to get more support for Sanai Takaichi. That's one. Two, they will need to start courting the opposition, which is something that they probably were not planning, in the past few weeks. So now they have most likely candidates for getting courted by LDP are going to be Democratic Party for People, who were the ones who also co-drafted that reform document together with Komeito, or could be Nippon Ishin Nokai, which is Japan's innovation party. And both of them, or either of them, are really necessary to secure at least some amount of votes if Sanai Takaichi wants to be elected as the prime minister. That's one. And two, no matter what happens, this exit by Komeito leaves LDP in a very, very vulnerable position. They had been slipping in terms of trust, not just within their coalition, within this partnership, but also if you look at the public opinion polls, LDP had been losing big. And so, given that a partner that has been staying for long enough time is exiting at this point, this is going to make it difficult, even if Sanai Takaichi were to be elected as the prime minister, passing any legislation, things like national budget, everything would become extremely difficult for them to manage, given that they have too many opposing forces now.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. Asta Chada for joining us from Japan and giving us that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on. US President Donald Trump has said that he plans to raise the issue